Hey everyone, welcome to History of Hackers Part 3. You don't want to miss this one because in this video, we've got an amazing discovery to share with you. In 1997, a mysterious red team exercise was held by the US government to evaluate national cybersecurity. This exercise remained highly classified for many years, and even today, much of the report is redacted. Little did we know, this red team exercise was actually linked to L0pht Heavy Industries, a band of precocious hackers that pioneered offensive security, led by cybersecurity legend and Twitter whistleblower Peter Zatko, aka Mudge. Did a group of amateur hackers work with the government to attack our nation's critical infrastructure? It's time to connect the dots. Smash that subscribe button and let's dive in. In 1997, the U.S. Department of Defense conducted an exercise called Eligible Receiver 97. The purpose of the exercise was to demonstrate national security threats that could be posed through a computer network. This was the first publicly known red team exercise, and it was hardcore. No notice was given. This represents the gold standard of offensive security. The National Security Agency, or the NSA, played the role of North Korea, Iran, and Cuba. They acted as our enemies. Their job was to perform simulated attacks to see if they could damage critical civilian infrastructure and take control of military command and control capabilities. Because this was a no-notice exercise, the NSA's targets didn't have time to prepare a defense. This was about as close to a real-world attack as you can get. The NSA's targets included the CIA, the FBI, State Department, the Justice Department, just to name a few. Agencies that were in charge of critical pieces of national infrastructure. So how did the exercise go? Cue the dumpster fire. The national infrastructure, somewhere in there. It should be no surprise that the results of Eligible Receiver 97 were immediately classified. But lucky for us, parts of the After Action report were declassified in 2017. In one of the interviews, Keith Abernathy, the DoD Red Team Chief Targeting Officer, gave his analysis of the attacks. He said, quote, "We pretty much had the blue team on the run by the third day of the actual exercise, so the need to play all of our capability wasn't there. We only played about 30% of what we could have. So the message there is, it could have been a lot worse." He went on to say, the detection mechanisms worked well. The reporting did not. What we're seeing now, well after the exercise, is a lot of data that would point towards activity that was compromising blue being reported now 2 weeks after the events occurred.
Hold up.
They played 30% of their hand, took full control of military command systems, and parts of the attack weren't even reported for 2 weeks? It's hard to even conceive of the damage they could have done. No wonder most of the declassified report is redacted. The government is so butthurt from Eligible Receiver 97, they still won't reveal the full scope of the attacks, and this was over 25 years ago. Let's talk about the attackers. Surely this must have been a huge operation with the latest and greatest technology.
Nope.
Abernathy said the NSA had 40 people working on these attacks, and only 30 of them were even full-time. They didn't have inside information. They didn't use state-of-the-art technology. They used hacker techniques and software that you could get off the shelf. He said you could walk into a Computer City and get the technology that they used.
Computer City, where you'll get Microsoft's Windows 95 with full, fast 32-bit multi-threading, multitasking, and one-button application access.
They used basic Computer City equipment and did some incredible things. They were able to deny services, manipulate email, disrupt communication. In total, they gained full control on over 36 government networks.
Look at me.
Sure.
Look at me.
Sure.
I'm the captain now.
Check out this amazing analogy from Abernathy in the After Action report.
My analogy is they now know that the horse is out of the barn after it burned down and the ashes are cold.
That quote is pure gold. Eligible Receiver 97 exposed how frail the nation's critical infrastructure was from a cybersecurity perspective. Now the government knew the true impact that a cyber attack could have. Think about it. Real attackers aren't going to warn you. They're not going to play 30% of their hand. What if an attacker takes over military command and control systems and orders you to turn off air defense radars or launch a ballistic missile? Our reliance on technology creates a gold mine for people with malicious intent. There are infinite ways to manipulate it. And Eligible Receiver 97 was the first time the government was able to understand the consequences of taking a passive approach to cybersecurity. Now, we said we were going to connect some dots in this video. Let's go back to what Abernathy said in that After Action report.
Relatively small number of people, totaling about 40, about 30 of which were full-time, about 10 that were part-time.
That got us to thinking. Who were these part-timers? Why would the NSA need other hackers? I mean, surely they had an all-star team already assembled for this exercise. Were there hackers out there that had been exploiting these systems all along? Hackers that could manipulate these systems with ease? Fast forward a year to 1998, when testimony given at a Governmental Affairs Committee hearing spelled out these national cybersecurity issues on a public stage. The interesting thing is, this testimony wasn't given by members of the NSA that participated in Eligible Receiver 97. It was given by a group of amateur hackers from Boston. We're talking about hackers that just did this as a hobby. They were part-timers.
We have been a strictly amateur group for a long time. It's very monetarily taxing for us. So
once day jobs, I guess.
Yes, we all have day jobs, and this all comes out of our own pockets.
They described themselves as amateurs, but many considered them the rock stars of hacking. And this band of hackers called themselves L0pht Heavy Industries. So how did these guys meet? In the 1980s and early 90s, you could interact with other people via what was known as a bulletin board system, or BBS. You'd use your modem to connect your computer to the internet over your telephone line, called dial-up.
This is a modem, and with it you can turn your computer into a window on the world.
These systems allowed you to upload or download software, you could read news and bulletins, you could exchange messages with people.
That anyone with a personal computer and a modem can dial into the well and have access to hundreds of other people with their knowledge and their information.
All of the L0pht hackers dialed up one particular bulletin board system that was known as a hub for hackers, called the Works, and that's where they first met. So they would message each other on the Works and plan in-person meetups. When they met up, they'd nerd out on hacking and bring each other exploits that they'd found. They all went by an alias, their unique hacker names.
Mudge, Weld, Brian Oblivion, Kingpin, Space Rogue, Tan, and Stefan.
Don't let the names fool you. These guys were no joke. They could hack pretty much anything. The main reason they formed a collective is so they could have a space to store all of their hacker equipment. They acquired a lot of it from the MIT flea market. They'd go dumpster diving, whatever they could get their hands on. Most of what they used was basic, run-of-the-mill equipment. Ah, basic equipment, you say. Where have we heard that before?
Using off-the-shelf capabilities, if you will, readily available in open source, using technology equipment that was available in open source with the exception of the Stu3, which was stolen, but everything else was stuff you could go into Computer City and buy.
Listen to this quote from Katie Masuris, a computer security pioneer who famously started the bug bounty program at Microsoft. This is what she said L0pht was able to do with basic equipment. Quote, when they invited members of the government and members of law enforcement to come and look at what they had assembled, that actually changed the threat models for these organizations, because they pretty much figured there was an economic barrier to most attackers uncovering security holes. Once they realized that, no, actually people can just dumpster dive for the stuff they can't afford, they suddenly were like, oh, revised. We've now revised our threat model. Okay, let's go over this. L0pht consists of part-time hackers who use off-the-shelf equipment, and they're so good at hacking with that equipment they made the government revise their threat model? Sounds like they fit the profile of the attackers in Eligible Receiver 97. But there's more to it. There are some quotes in the testimony they gave before Congress that seem to connect the dots even further. I would encourage you to watch the whole testimony they gave. It's pretty fascinating. It's actually up on Joe Grand, aka Kingpin's YouTube channel. We'll leave a link in the description so you can check it out. L0pht dropped some bombs in their testimony.
Within 30 minutes, the 7 of you could make the internet unusable for the entire nation. Is that correct?
That's correct. Actually, one of us with just a few packets.
Hold up.
These guys could shut down the whole internet in 30 minutes. Think about how insane that is. They didn't even hesitate. They knew it was possible.
The fact that, we like not being in jail. We'd say, no, we wouldn't do that if we really wanted to and really had to.
Okay.
Yes.
In their testimony, they explained how they would break things and then work with software vendors to coordinate patching when they found vulnerabilities. Some companies would fix the problems, but many would wait until they made the exploit public.
Some of the problems that are found are reported to the manufacturers, and they don't even make a fix publicly available. And until the problem mushrooms up and enough people complain about it, then they'll come out with a public fix.
But here's the key connection we have been alluding to. At one point in the testimony, Mudge mentions how they had previously worked with the Defense Department on denial of service attacks.
We know the Department of Defense just did a very large investigation into what's known as denial of service attacks against the infrastructure. In our various day jobs, we contributed a large portion of the information to that actual investigation.
Sounds a lot like Eligible Receiver 97, doesn't it? Is it possible that concerns raised by L0pht when the government officials initially visited led the Department of Defense to conduct Eligible Receiver 97 in the first place? Sure, they were labeled as amateurs, but if you check out their testimony, it's clear they had a sophisticated knowledge of computer systems and cybersecurity as a whole. And here Mudge is, before Congress, saying that they contributed a significant amount of information to a Department of Defense investigation. It doesn't exactly seem like a coinky-dink that 1 year later they're testifying to Congress about the importance of national cybersecurity. The results of Eligible Receiver 97 were classified, and Mudge says in the clip they lamented the fact that the results of their contribution was classified.
Much to our chagrin, the learnings from it were instantly classified, which we were giving them largely public information.
Was Mudge talking about a different project, or was L0pht testimony a way of warning the country about the damage that could result from a cyber attack like the one that occurred in Eligible Receiver 97? There's another intriguing quote from Mudge in the oral history of L0pht. He says, if there was an opportunity to go to the Department of Defense or the Armed Forces or the intelligence community, CIA, NSA, even Quantico a couple of times, or anything inside the government, I would do it pro bono. So clearly, Mudge had a history of working with the government. But there's more to his quote. He went on to say, the Senate thing was an opportunity where they'd approached me several times and I said, no, I'm uncomfortable with that, and there's no way I'm going to try to convince the law folks for it, because the group was very wary of the government. And then ultimately, one of the times Dick and some other folks reached out and they said, well, here's the message we're trying to send. we want public awareness here, and that's kind of your mission. I was like, this is an opportunity. An opportunity for what exactly? To show the public what the damage that an attack from our enemies could actually look like. Why would the other L0pht members be wary of the government? Well, the CFAA and subsequent prosecution of hackers had created a bit of a hostile atmosphere between the government and hacker communities. It stands to reason that might have made the L0pht team more than a little uneasy to talk about their work. But the damning results of Eligible Receiver 97 were classified, and someone needed to tell the public about the newfound threat cybersecurity posed. The main point that L0pht members were trying to make to Congress was that companies needed to be held responsible for security, that the bar for security needed to be raised, and that government as a whole needed to be aware of how vulnerable these systems really were.
How can one be expected to protect a system on a network where any of the 7 individuals seated before you can tear down the foundation that the network was built upon, let alone the systems that are sitting on top of it?
They explained the damage they could do based on the vulnerabilities they discovered, and the list was extensive. They laid out all the damage from that after-action report and more, everything that could result from a cyber attack.
I can learn everything you're doing, I can watch your movements, I can stop your movements, I can issue requests on your behalf. You'd be surprised how much stuff is tied into the general networks now.
The damage they described was hypothetical, but only because they didn't have malicious intentions. They were fully capable of launching these attacks. Take a listen to the committee chairman.
If a foreign government was able to assemble a group of gentlemen such as yourself, how much damage could they do?
We'd be in trouble.
In that scenario, go ahead.
I don't know if you heard that, but they laughed and said, we'd be in trouble. They were laughing because they knew how bad it would be. Here's Mudge talking about the critical infrastructure an attack could affect.
Brian, do you want to talk about some of the satellite communications, or let alone just taking us down from the financial aspect? There's so many different ways that
well, each of you
havoc could be wreaked.
Comment on that.
And here's Space Rogue summing it all up for the committee.
I think if a nation state funded a group of people to attack the United States electronically, the number of systems that can be disrupted or compromised is so great that it would probably wreak a lot of havoc in the country.
So they knew the damage a cyber attack could inflict on critical infrastructure, and their own testimony makes it pretty clear they played a significant role in Eligible Receiver 97. These guys were like Paul Revere sounding the alarm. They wanted everyone to know the stakes, and they really wanted to hold companies' feet to the fire to make sure they were creating secure software. There was an interesting discussion in the hearing about the trade-offs between security and profit. This is something that's still relevant today. Any security measure that a company puts in place inevitably costs time and resources that then can't be spent on new features or capabilities. It's kind of like authentication, a layer of protection that's vital to security. If a user is required to use authentication, it protects them. But if a user is required to re-authenticate to access each and every individual resource they need to do their job, it protects them, but at what cost? Here's a clip from Mudge talking about the issues with software security.
Why don't strong authentication properties exist in these protocols? Most likely the same reason that simple security mechanisms are missing from all of the software, or almost all of the software, sold to corporations and agencies today. It's cheaper and it's easier for companies to sell insecure software.
L0pht argued companies should prioritize security as much as they prioritize profit. This is something companies and their technology providers are still falling short on today.
There's no liability attached to the manufacturers, and there's no policing done to stop companies from selling insecure software under the guise of secure.
Another key point in their testimony was that absolute security is unattainable, as systems by nature are inherently vulnerable.
Do you think there is a system can be designed that would be foolproof?
If you put them in a secluded room, put a guy with a gun next to it, and don't let it talk to other systems, it's relatively secure.
Though you can never assure a system is completely secure, the bar for defensive measures should be continually raised to protect their users.
I don't think it's possible to design a foolproof system, but I don't think that should be the goal. The goal should be to make it very difficult to get in.
Companies should be proactive about securing their products or services. L0pht characterized most of the security measures they'd recommend to be trivial, simple fixes that would have a big impact. They urged the committee to try to hold companies accountable. They urged anyone in charge of critical infrastructure to start making these changes.
You, the government and consumer, should care and want software products to include security and authentication mechanisms, and I think you do. You should encourage the companies to include this in their products and hold them liable when their products fail.
So the L0pht testimony was huge. All of the national cybersecurity flaws were laid bare on the public stage.
If you make it easy enough for yourself or somebody else to use it, you make it vulnerable.
They were able to demonstrate how powerful hacking can be, how an amateur group of hackers could take down the internet. That's how you get credibility in cybersecurity, proof by demonstration. L0pht pioneered white hat hacking.
I look at you guys as the white hats in this whole thing. Yeah, I think your motivation, as far as I know, is excellent.
Sure, they broke things, but their motive was to protect people. And if you connect all the dots, it seems like their testimony was another brilliant hack to divulge the damage from eligible receiver 97 that the government classified. They were able to backdoor the Department of Defense and show the public damage that a cyber attack could really do. And that's a pretty awesome moment in the history of hackers, if you ask me. That brings us to the end of part 3. Thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button if you want more content like this. But before we go, let's send you off with a little mic drop from the man, the myth, the legend, Mudge.
If you're looking for computer security, then the internet is not the place to be. If you think that you're an exception to the norm and that you have a secure setup that communicates over the internet, you're probably mistaken. Furthermore, if you feel that the government is giving you access to the enabling technology you need to combat this problem, you're wrong yet again.